And the next day, I woke up in a horrible, horrible state. And everything that was inside of me came out of me
Mm,
through every means that it could.
yeah.
And by the grace of God, I woke up because had I perhaps been sleeping on my back, which I wasn't, I probably would have choked to death on
Yeah.
what came. Some behavior that we do to the point of numbness in order to escape reality. And all of these behaviors, whether it's drinking or shopping or sex or gambling or drugs, are all meant to numb out the traumatizing effect of whatever happened. Oftentimes you'll see it, somebody will say, well, my parents weren't alcoholics. I say, well, what about your grandparents? Oh, yeah, and so it can skip a generation, but it is genetic. I have never seen it not pan out that it wasn't in somebody's history. Family
Yeah.
medical. Prayer and meditation simply refers to some awareness in your life of something larger than oneself that you can communicate with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a god or a supreme being of some kind. So I really like to say that because no one within a 12-step program will insist that you adopt any belief system. Well, what I realized in this slow down thing is that I was actually suddenly getting far more efficient in the work. At the end of the day, miraculously, the inbox would be empty. My desk got spick and span clean. Like all people are like, how do you keep your desk like that clean? I said, I don't know. I'm moving in slow motion.
Welcome to a conversation with Faye, where storytelling takes the stage. I'm your host, Faye Waterman. Each week, we explore the powerful narratives that shape our lives and our world. This isn't just another show, it's a journey through the raw, the real, and the heartfelt stories that inspire, challenge, and transform. Whether you're drawn to tales of triumph, get ready to be captured, motivated, and deeply moved as we uncover the stories that connect us all. So join the conversation and let's write a new chapter. Today's guest is Ray Straub, a remarkable leader in the field of mental fitness for business leaders in recovery. Ray's journey is one of resilient transformation. Having faced the dark shadows of depression, he sought every avenue to reclaim his life, from 12-step program, psychotherapy, and more. Each step was a vital part of his recovery, but what truly drove him was the profound desire to master his own mind. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, Faye.
Great. Now, Ray, you have been on a journey and that journey has taken you to another space. But let's go back and share part of your journey as to who you are, firstly, and where you've come from to where you are today. So let's share a little bit of your backstory.
Okay, sure. I'm in the US right now. I live in New York City. I'm originally from Indiana. It's in the middle of the United States and it's considered the US Midwest. The life growing up was our lives as a family took a very circuitous route, I should say. So, sometime in the mid 60s, my father had the largest bankruptcy that our state had ever seen. And he then moved the family as one would, and I say that with my tongue in my cheek, to San Juan, inner city San Juan, Puerto Rico, and where we spent a number of years. And I was put into a Spanish-speaking grade school, and so I picked up that language skill as a souvenir. And then we moved from there about 4 years later into rural Florida, in the panhandle of Florida, in a town called Pensacola, Florida. And so I start there because my journey kind of starts with that family chaos that we lived in. And So, it was a big drinking family. We're a big Irish Catholic family, and I was one of 8 children. So that actually adds a layer to that complexity. And I always laugh. My older 2 siblings, they were anybody who's familiar with a large family dynamic will know. Oh, there we go. Very
Of
good.
9.
You're one of 9. Oh, that's terrific. Well, then you might be able to validate, the statement that the parenting often falls off precipitously the farther you go down the age ladder. Uh, the older kids get, 2 very eager parents to do the right thing, who are there front and center for the children. And the younger children tend to raise themselves, you know.
True, or the older children tend to nurture the younger children.
Right, right. So exactly. Well, that actually happened. So we had like, our oldest sister, we often called our second mother, and that's who people call, my mother did pass away about 20 years ago, and so people still rely on my sister as the matriarch of the family.
Mm.
Uh, so exactly, exactly. Um, but where I'm going with that is that my oldest 2 siblings were not allowed to drink until they were about 18 years old. And when they were 18, my parents sat them down and gave them drinking lessons. They
Drinking lessons. Please share. What's a
yes.
drinking lesson from a parent?
They taught them what a martini was, how to mix drinks, that if they went out to a bar to know what was in the drink, to order a simple drink where the recipe was specified in the order, a gin and tonic, scotch and soda, but things with funny names often had funny ingredients in them that you couldn't tell and could be dangerous for my sister in particular. Even in the early 50s, 60s, they were worried about roofies in drugs and drinks and things like that. They were taught, proper etiquette, what kind of drink goes in a rocks glass, what goes in a tumbler, what goes into this, all of these kinds of things. Yes, exactly.
Really? That's quite
Yes.
amazing. I mean, usually the parents don't teach you how to drink or what to be aware of or anything like that. You usually go and find that out yourself and make your own mistakes. So
Bingo.
tell us more.
Well, I was from the second camp that you just, my father, when I was 12, basically cracked open a beer and handed it to me at a party. And that was the start of my drinking career. And of course, like a lot of families in, the harmless thing of kids had sips from parents' drinks and things like that. So that had happened. But by the time I was 15, if anybody in the household was drinking, I was drinking. And if they were having a cocktail, I was having a cocktail. Wine with dinner, I was having wine with dinner. Aperitif, a cordial after dinner, boom, I was there. And by the time I was 17, I was drinking alcoholically. So I had my first red flag drinking moment with my father after an argument with my father when I was 17, when I stormed off to my room after this argument, and then he walked up and knocked on the bedroom door and said, "Hey, come on downstairs. We're going to settle this like men." And in my household, that meant we're going to drink over it.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah. So
Okay.
he sat down and poured himself a scotch in a rocks glass, a proper rocks glass. And I picked up a rocks glass and I looked over on the kitchen counter, and there's a brand new bottle of white rum there, a fifth of white rum. And I
Was it
cracked the seal.
100%? Was it
Pardon?
100%? Was it
Yes.
100%?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah, it was high. Well, good question. I remember it being a white rum like a Bacardi or a Don Q, one of those, but it was bad enough because if you've ever had white rum the way I drank it that night, neat, like no mixer, no ice, no fruit juice, nothing
Oh
in
my
it. I just
God.
poured
How
it into
much
a glass and drank it.
Oh, you would have been off your head.
So uh, I drained that bottle dry in about 45 minutes or an hour. Just
Wow.
talking, pouring it, drinking it like it was water, putting it down. Um, and at the end of the conversation, I said, "Well, thanks for talking to me." And my dad later said, "You weren't slurring your words or nothing." I was like, you can handle your liquor. He was really proud of that. And the next day, I woke up in a horrible, horrible state. And everything that was inside of me came out of me
Mm,
through every means that it could.
yeah.
And by the grace of God, I woke up, because had I perhaps been sleeping on my back, which I wasn't, I probably would have choked to death
Yeah.
on what came up.
Mm,
So um, I threw all the bedroom linens into the laundry and I washed them, and I went to my job that day, which was digging ditches in the noonday heat in Alabama in July, here in the US, which is a hot month. And years later, I told a doctor about that incident, who was also a recovering alcoholic. He happened to be an anesthesiologist. And so he knew a thing or two about how drugs affect the body. And he said, "Well, actually, do you happen to know that what qualified you as an alcoholic wasn't what you drank or how fast you drank it or the way you drank it? What qualified you as an alcoholic was the fact that you functioned the next day." He goes, "By rights, that should have killed you. That
mm,
should have poisoned you to death."
mm.
It was classic alcohol poisoning. And that's one of the natures. And in that conversation with that man, I realized that my condition as an alcoholic was a medical condition. It was not a character issue. It was he explained to me, and that he also told me that if I ever go in for surgery, make sure I tell the anesthesiologist that I was in recovery, because he'll have to dose me up 10 to 30% more.
Okay.
And he said alcoholics' bodies do not process these types of drugs the same way. That's what makes them an alcoholic. So your liver and your kidneys and certain enzymes function in a certain way that trigger the alcoholism. Um,
So
so
you were actually an alcoholic at the age of 17.
that's 17. Yeah.
You
Now,
had your first drink at 12, and
mhm,
then it continued from there. And you wrote yourself off at the age of 17 because you had to settle an argument with your father. Did that argument get settled, or can you remember anything about it?
I have no clue. And I have no recollection. It was a garden variety teenager, over emotional reaction, probably to being asked, could I pass the salt? You know, and I was a teenager, stop there. And
Were, were, were your parents alcoholics?
yes,
Mm.
yes.
Both of them?
So and that brings me to another point. I was probably an alcoholic at birth, because there's a lot of scientific evidence now that talks about the genetic effect of it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So both your parents were alcoholics.
correct. My mother uh, was rehabbed. She went to, I think, at least three alcoholic rehabs in the last 10 years of her life, three 90-day stays each. And unfortunately, she never, came to sobriety, as she would always relapse when she uh,
Came out.
came out. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty tough gig, isn't it? When you've been an alcoholic all your life and then you go in to rehab for a period of time, 90 days, and then
Hmm.
you come out and you think that everything will be okay, but all it takes is one trigger to turn it back around to where it started.
Right. That's it. It's the smallest of things. Um, it's all about emotion generally, which is where that trigger lies. So,
Yes.
one of the top things in recovery that I had to learn was handling those emotions. And I had a rage problem from an early age. Um,
Was it before you started before your first drink that you had that rage problem?
yep,
Right.
yep.
So
I could point to that very easily. Yeah.
did your parents, either of your parents, have a rage problem in their lives?
Yes, my mother did. My
Your mother
mother
did.
could be quite physically abusive when she was a very beautiful woman, very elegant woman, um, a whip smart sense of humor. Uh, but when the switch snapped on her, with me in particular, and this is common in alcoholic families, she would get violent. There's often one child that gets singled out for that kind of behavior, and they refer to that child as the scapegoat,
Mm.
the one who the alcoholic system, family system, sort of heaps its pain on, so that they can point to something. That's why we're, all upset. It's him.
And is that the blame game?
It is, well, it is and it isn't. So the real blame, where I carried that around, it was like a dark cloud on me, where everything was their fault. That I had to deal with that. And uh, from a deep forgiveness standpoint. However, there is something referred to as alcoholic family systems theory that people can Google if they want. And different camps ascribe 4 to 6 roles that the children and the family members fall into. So, as you mentioned, there's often a child who becomes a second parent because the real parent is not functioning at a level that they should be functioning at.
Yeah.
So that child gets referred to as the hero. Um, and in
Right.
many cases, pardon,
The hero.
the hero,
Why is
right?
that?
Well, because they're fixing everything. They're running around taking care of things that they shouldn't be taking care of at too young an age.
Yeah.
Uh, and people in the family start looking to them, and then they start trying to fix things that they have no business fixing.
Yeah.
So the hero child starts meddling in people's lives, so all of these things are coping mechanism as a child that get them through the alcoholic system. But then when they're launched off into their own lives, they often turn into very dysfunctional elements of their own behavior. Um,
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? The things that can actually happen and when you're growing up and the situations that you're in can change the way that you're looked upon by your siblings and your parents, but also change your, I'm thinking your behavior as an individual as well, because you're taking on that responsibility, which is
mhm,
not your responsibility in the first place, but you
right,
see there is a place for it because no one else is doing it, or you think no one else is doing it.
right, right, right. And you start to think, yes, there are things that are legitimately not being done that have to be done. A parent not waking up, for instance, early enough in the morning to get the children launched to school. For instance, that hero child will jump in and make everybody's lunch. Um, that's just one example of what goes on. But then as they start to get comfortable in that role, they start taking on more and more chores. They'll start making dinner. They'll start being the person who other siblings come to for advice and whatnot. Um, I want to address something when you said, is that the blame game? Because that question sort of came into me. I heard it in multiple layers.
Mm.
So
Okay.
within the family, yes, people are blaming that child. That is the blame game and the shame game that they're putting on that child, because oftentimes it's too dangerous to actually blame the parent for the troubles in the family, the chaos that's ensuing, and the lack of responsibility being taken.
You just said then that the blame game, I'm not sure how you said it, but it's interesting how we blame others for our own insecurities or nonsensical behavior, if I can
Right.
say that, because it's easy
Mm-hmm.
than taking the responsibility and seeing the consequences as they actually are. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That's the core to recovery circles, is finally waking up and taking that responsibility. The first step in a 12-step program reads, we admitted we were powerless and that our lives had become unmanageable. And so you insert, words here where you say, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and that our lives had become unmanageable. And without that admission, it is very difficult to abstain from whatever your drug or behavior of choice is. You have to realize that, you are not going to win a battle if you with this bottle of alcohol.
So you have to be specific in what you say when you're working on overcoming the issue of alcoholism or drug dependency or whatever it might be. It has to be the specific words. So if you were a drug addict, you'd have to say drugs,
Right,
etc.
right.
And
And you have to start out specific. Once you've got some recovery under your belt, you can broaden it out to realize you're powerless over many things in life. But yes.
it's a brave move to actually step into that 12-step program, which is known really as Alcoholics Anonymous, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It
And it
is.
is.
It is. I want to be careful of one thing. While Alcoholics Anonymous is a big pillar in my particular recovery, I am not a spokesman for them, nor am I a salesperson. I know many people in my personal life who've gotten sober without using AA. It's just been a very powerful tool for me. And I'm careful about saying that because, you know, all sobriety for all individuals is fragile. And if for any reason, as you pointed it out at the very beginning, one little trigger can boom, a series of events can boom, they're picking up again. And that's because of the complex mental psychology that's going on inside an alcoholic's brain.
Well,
So,
I was having a conversation with another person on my show last week who was also an alcoholic and has for 40 years not touched a drop, but started at a very young age due to certain issues that had happened in her life. And she talks about the 12-step program. And I think, to each their own as to how they take those steps to get themselves better, whether it's the 12-step program, whether it's something completely different to that. But it's a brave move to be able to firstly admit that you're an alcoholic, because you're always in denial in the first place, aren't you?
mhm. Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
I've never
Absolutely.
been an alcoholic. I remember
Mhm.
getting drunk a few times, not often though, um, because it's not a good feeling the next day when you wake up. But you said something about you're a functioning alcoholic because you got out of bed after all that rum, after you actually puked your guts up, and I'm going to say
Mhm.
that, because that's what
Yeah,
you did,
that's what I did.
literally. And then you got up, you washed your sheets, you cleaned everything up, and then you went to work.
Mhm.
Your body must have been, oh, I can't imagine it. Your head would have been pounding. Your body would have felt like, I don't know what it would have felt like. But
Mhm.
you were a functioning alcoholic. Did
Right.
the people know that you were working with know you were an alcoholic?
Uh, it's a good question. Some didn't, some didn't. So I drank continuously for another 25 years, but after that moment, I tried to stop immediately. And it took me 25 years to gain real sobriety. I kept going on forced abstinence periods and the like, and people around me, occasionally somebody would turn to me and say, I think you're an alcoholic. And in one case, I was about 23 years old, and a bartender refused to serve me. And I said, well, why? He goes, well, you're an alcoholic. And I went, I paused. I went, well, actually, you're right. Serve me anyway. And he went, okay. And
And he
so
served you?
and he served me. Now, 20 years later, in a casual conversation with a close friend who used to drink with me in that bar, he just mentions apropos of nothing. He goes, you know the guy who owned that bar, the guy who was always behind Jim behind the bar? He was a recovering alcoholic. And so that answered two questions. Why did he know that I was an alcoholic? And why did he stop when I said, serve me anyway? He knew that it was useless to try
It
to
was,
convince me.
yeah, it was a waste of time because you'd go somewhere else and do it anyway.
Exactly. And he
And
saw me consider it and he heard the truth of what I said. I knew I was an alcoholic. But if you heard that first step, it says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. It doesn't say we were told, we were diagnosed, we thought. We actually knew we were alcoholics and we finally came to admit it. So,
that is a brave move in itself to actually admit that you're an alcoholic or you're a drug addict or you're something else or something else. And it takes a lot of, I'll say courage, but I want to say guts. It takes a lot of guts to actually admit that you're either one or the other or whatever, and then to take the steps to move away from that so that your life changes.
mhm.
Share some of the stories in that 25 years on from the age of 17 or 23 when the man behind the bar, what was he doing working in a hotel serving alcohol when he's a recovering alcoholic? The temptation must have been huge for him.
Well, he actually, he wasn't in a hotel. He owned this little bar. It was a small bar that probably couldn't fit more than 20 patrons at a time.
And he
And
owned it,
he
and
owned
he
it.
was a recovering alcoholic. What was he proving to himself?
I don't know. I wish this is a conversation I'd dearly love to have with him today to say that story actually did eventually help me. Um, become sober because I was able to trace back the number of people who pointed it out to me, who validated it and said, you need to get help. There are a number of people who tried to intervene in that way. But what he was doing there, I have no clue. I think
Wow.
I have heard some people say that they had jobs like that and as sort of a ministry, if you will. Um, there's another friend of mine who it's too lucrative. He does work in a hotel bar, a very expensive high-end hotel bar here in Manhattan. And he says it's just too lucrative for me to give up. Um,
The
and
job itself, but
the job itself.
he's in sobriety now.
He's been sober many years. I think now he's almost 10 years sober. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Does he find
Uh,
the temptation of working in there to have a drink, or it's a bit like someone who smokes. You know, when they
Right.
smell the cigarette smoke, they think, oh, I'd love to have a cigarette or whatever. And they know if they do that, that'd be it. They'd be back on the road to smoking again.
Well, that trigger is very complex. And for me, my experience in working with others in recovery and whatnot is that the chemical triggers subside over time. That if I taste it, if I smell it, if I, do something, those are chemical triggers happening in the body that over time, those tend to dissipate. Not that they're not active, and not that there are many people who have relapse stories that are triggered chemically. However, my experience working with others, if after a year of sobriety, when somebody relapses, they don't go out on a chemical trigger, they go out on an emotional trigger.
Okay.
Um, and for an alcoholic, the psychiatry, the psychology can be very complex, and it's often over something we might think was meaningless. And it's often related to trauma. So one of the things that I think has been proven is that alcoholism in particular is related to psychological trauma. So PTSD, people with post-traumatic stress disorder and whatnot. When you read the symptom list of PTSD, it's pretty much dead in line with the symptom list for alcoholism.
Mm.
And it includes alcoholism.
Mm.
PTSD's symptom list includes alcoholism. And so my rage problem was related to my traumas, which again was linked very tightly into the alcoholism. So small emotional events, it's usually the straw that breaks the camel's back,
Yeah.
are what sends someone out there drinking again in many cases.
Yeah. It's a bit like, when I walk past someone or come near someone and they're smoking, it's just, for me, it's repulsive. It's a
Hmm.
horrible smell.
Hmm.
But for them, they probably don't even smell it. They don't.
Well, it's a good question. I've had people, I had a teacher in college who said, you're not allowed to smoke in my class at the times when you could smoke in a classroom in college. He goes, no smoking in my class. And I don't even want, and he goes, I'm a recovered smoker and I cannot stand the smell. He said, it disgusts me that much. I have another friend of mine who's long-term recovery from alcohol, and won't walk into a bar, not because of the emotional trigger. He's disgusted by the smell.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
yeah, and the smell does not disgust me. It's neutral to me. I don't actually, doesn't do anything for me. I don't even notice it.
Mm.
What I do notice, and I can notice almost a block away, and I say that facetiously, but very 10 feet away from me, I can smell somebody who's drunk. Um, and it's a
Because
big,
you have a high, what do you say, a very high, um,
I would use the word recall.
yeah, because you know what it smells like. You've been around it. It's like,
It's
smoking.
familiar.
Yeah, and I've never smoked. Oh, my mother
Mhm.
gave me a smoke when I was young, and I smoked it, and I was sick, and I've never done it since. So, and she used to smoke all the time, a pack a day, pack and a half a day. But
Oh boy.
yeah,
Wow.
but it's like you don't. You say it comes from trauma. Do you actually get to deal with the root cause of the trauma to solve the issue of alcoholism? What is it that happens?
What's fascinating in 12-step programs in particular is that the only time the drug or behavior of choice is mentioned is in that first step. there are 11 more steps after that that all deal with the trauma.
Yeah.
And it really is, and that's my opinion about it. I think anybody who would read those 12 steps would say, you're not dealing with alcohol anymore after the first step. You're dealing with the underlying trigger, the underlying condition, life condition.
And it usually is, I mean, you look at PTSD, there's a trauma there. So, and you look at the people that come back from war, men and women who are living with PTSD or whatever it might be, the trauma that they've seen that they never speak about. So they have to calm that by either becoming a drug addict or an alcoholic or whatever it might be, until such time that they're ready to deal with that trauma. And I think that a lot of the time, we as humans, we all have a certain amount of trauma in our life. Some of it's huge and really causes symptoms of alcoholism, drug addict, whatever it might be. And others, it may be a combination of many smaller triggers of trauma that build up over a period of time that we need to deal with as humans. And I'll say humans because there is so much mental health. There are so many mental health issues out there that are not being dealt with. And people are walking around, you know, almost suicidal because they have no way of finding the right help for them to be able to change and deal with that trauma so that they can take that step.
Many people don't know they're traumatized. They think this is just part of who I am.
Yeah, that's a good point. A part of who you are. And, you know, they'll say to you, and if you have, I mean, I used to know people that have card readings all the time, and they'd say this, that, and everything else, and what happened to you at this age, or what happened to you at that age? And they say, I don't know. I don't know. Because I think we as humans, again, manage to block things out, but it's still that underlying trigger for lots of things that happen in our lives. And it takes one thing that triggers it. We don't know what that thing is. And then we go off on this tangent of whatever behavior it might be.
Correct. That what I refer to like is the numbing behavior. So to me, you know, there if you look in Wikipedia, for instance, I think they've got an article that lists all of the different 12-step programs that are out there, and there's over 30 of them. They're all based on Alcoholics Anonymous. And I say these all grow up around some behavior that we do to the point of numbness in order to escape reality. And so all of these behaviors, whether it's drinking or shopping or sex or gambling or drugs, are all meant to numb out the traumatizing effect of whatever happened.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we can all find an outlet for a big trauma or a multiple of smaller traumas that have built up over a period of time.
Right.
And
they refer to that as acute, a singular event or events that have happened, car accident, assault, war, as you said, or chronic. Exactly what you're describing, these multiple little events that create the same level of trauma, but like being told by a parent again and again that you're not worth anything, you're not going to amount to anything, you know, and being treated that way. That's a chronic cause of.
It's interesting because you make me reflect back when when my children were growing up and I knew people that would call their kids stupid and dumb and useless. And I never believed in that. It never happened to me as a child when I was growing up. My parents never said anything like that to me. My teachers did, my
Hmm.
teachers. But it's interesting, isn't it, how we perceive things. And I always say, what we say, we understand what we're saying, but the perception for someone else can interpret it in a totally different way, depending on their emotion, depending on where they're at in life or what their circumstances are. They can take it in and interpret it in a different way to what you meant.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. It's your filter, and your filters grow up from they come up through the soil of your causes and conditions in life. This filter that you look through um, in life, and all of us have one. We all have our filter. No matter how open-minded we think we are, we have our biases that have come up, and you often don't know. You know, I can still get emotionally triggered about things, and there are some people who in my life have said, "I just can't imagine you even being annoyed, much less angry." And or rageful. And I said, "Oh, you just got to be there that day."
Do you still have some of that rage, or is it more controllable now?
Well, the rage is gone. I can say the rage itself, as far as what I call DEFCON 5, of a nuclear explosion. This is rage up here. This is when my fists would fly and when my voice, would I would be yelling or screaming, and I'd be completely uncontrolled, and my anger is that's gone in my life. Um, for me now, I'm certain something could bring it out. I have a son, and threats to him could easily trigger a parental rage.
Yeah, a protection, a
A
protection.
protection,
Yeah,
a protective rage there, but
yeah.
it's not the irrational rage that I had before. But I refer to these as, the DEFCONs of, like, defense conditions of, I forget whether one is the highest level. I think one is the highest state of readiness we're at. And so DEFCON 1, I think, is where the rage would reside. But I'm human. I get annoyed at things.
We all do.
Yeah, we all do. We
Yeah,
all do.
yeah.
And uh, what my son has Down syndrome. He's 16 years old, and he navigates our neighborhood by himself, and it's a busy New York City neighborhood. But sometimes I will just shadow him a bit, a few blocks behind, and a car cut him off in the crosswalk not long ago. And that started going from DEFCON 5, the lowest level of readiness, going, and I stopped the driver. And I said, "You just cut off a special needs child trying to cross the street over there. Did you see that? You weren't paying a lick of attention to what you were doing." And that's, getting very righteous and getting in somebody's face.
But what was
Uh,
the response? What was their response?
Well, he turned around and looked at my son, and he said, "Oh, he wasn't in the crosswalk when I took the turn." I said, "Yes, he was." He goes, "Okay, I apologize." And I said, "Thank you. Just keep your eye open."
Yeah.
But I could tell inside of myself that what was coming up for me, that had I been drinking again, I'd have been trying to open that man's car door and pull him out of the car. you know so wouldn't have been my best Buddha moment, as I
Watch out for Ray.
right. And truly, there was really no reason for me to confront the driver. He might have been the safest driver on the planet and had a moment. you know I've had moments. It's New York City. He might have been looking at something else he thought was more dangerous.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of people crossing the street. So when I went home, I sent that man some loving thoughts and thought, listen, I hope I didn't ruin your day, but you know, I just sent him some thoughts, and
Do you know, you just reminded me of an experience. You know how you're driving along and a car wants to get in front of you, and they can only get in front of you. They can't advance any further. They can't go any further. Anyway, there was this time, and I was on the left-hand side, and they were on the right-hand side, and he wasn't going to let me in, come hell or high water. So I just let him go. Anyway, we stopped at these lights. This woman got out of the car, that particular car, came over to my door, driver's door, and she said, "I apologize for my husband and how rude he was."
hmm,
She was so embarrassed. She had to get out of the car and
wow,
come and apologize for him because he was so irate. He
right.
was very rude and
Hmm,
inconsiderate. And, you know, if someone wants to get in, let them in. You know, I'm not going
right,
to argue with them. And
right,
it's like, and she did. I thought she was going to come and punch me out or something.
right.
And no, she just apologized for his behavior when she didn't
Hmm,
have to do that at all.
no, no, no.
But it was
It
very
makes me
interesting.
that would be a common alcoholic dynamic. It wouldn't surprise me at all to learn that her husband may have been drinking at the time, but we talked earlier about that hero child, that hero response. A spouse often takes that same hero response to take responsibility for the alcoholic in their lives and do things like apologize on their behalf when that's really not their job.
Yeah,
Um, Even though that they're embarrassed by the behavior, which I can understand, but they don't have to go out and try to make things right for the alcoholic in their life. Um, but that's a very common response. So I wouldn't doubt it at all uh, if alcohol factored into that story somehow.
right. Yeah, because it's interesting to think about. You know, you bring up things you tend to forget about these things until you're having conversations such as this to and it tweaks something. It's like tweaking a trauma or tweaking something, and you think, oh, I remember this situation. I thought,
Mhm.
okay, let you go, off you go, I don't care.
Right.
Ray, you were another 23 years or 25 years from the age of 23, or was it from the age of 17 that
A-
you
Age of 17. I got sober at 41. I,
41?
right. So I was drinking alcoholically from about the time I was 16, the time I was 21. And the red flag moment I refer to happened at 17, very early in my progression. And alcoholism is progressive. It just gets worse with age, whether you drink or not. And I can talk about that a little later. But yeah, so what happened at 17 is I realized deep down inside, I had a different relationship to alcohol than many other people did. And I immediately tried to start quitting. So uh, my Zoom is giving hand gestures. I'm going to change my setting there. I just realized that it's doing that.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to I've known a few alcoholics. I mean, I have a drink. And then I say, I'm not drinking, you know, I'm not drinking. And then I'll have a drink. But I'm not an alcoholic. I can go without alcohol and it doesn't affect me. In fact, you feel much better when you don't drink.
Right.
You
Right.
feel much
Most
better.
people do. Even non-alcoholics feel better when they don't drink.
Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting to have a conversation. And I know one of my friends, her husband was an alcoholic. Her her husband's dad was an alcoholic. So, you know, that generational thing, that gene pool, I suppose, that you get along the way has that tendency to bring on things that stem not necessarily immediately from your parents, but it could be their parents or their grandparents or someone else that comes through the generations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it can skip a generation.
Yeah.
So oftentimes you'll see it, somebody will say, well, my parents weren't alcoholics. I say, well, what about your grandparents? Oh, yeah, and so it can skip a generation, but it is genetic. I have never seen it not pan out uh, that it wasn't in somebody's history, family
Yeah.
medical history.
Well, my dad was a big drinker. He drank shandies, half a glass of beer and the rest lemonade when he did drink. Nothing else. Never saw him drink anything else, and very rare that was. Very
Hmm.
rare occasions
Hmm.
did he drink. It was, yeah, interesting when you
Yeah.
when you when you see things. He was a shandy drinker.
The other factor I've never not seen in someone with alcoholism is the trauma. There is a traumatizing trigger in every single person I've ever met with alcoholism.
Yeah, yeah, and or gambling or
Hmm.
drugs or all the things that you mentioned, there's
Hmm.
always a trauma factor. It's like eating disorders, there's a
Hmm.
trauma factor in that. And it's a,
Right.
a mental health issue. And I know a few people who, young girls that are, and I see people when I'm walking, older women, and I think, whoa, you've got an eating disorder. You know, you just pick them. You can see
Yeah.
them.
Right.
And
Right.
it's and it can be quite disturbing because
Hmm.
you know what they're doing to themselves, but
Yeah,
they
oh, it's
don't.
very hard to watch. And in particular, family members, that watching a loved one go through alcoholism or addiction, what I've often analogized it to, it's like a parent watching a child play in traffic, knowing you can't do anything until they get hit by a car.
Oh,
You know, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying to live with an alcoholic or an addict in your life.
mm.
And it doesn't matter what the drug or behavior of choice is. It's just terrifying to be around.
So let's get to the point where you started the 12 steps. How many times did you start, not finish, and then finish the 12 steps? How many times?
By the grace of God, as of today, only once.
Only
The first
once.
time,
Wow.
only once.
That's pretty
Yes.
amazing.
Yes. I've been sober now since May 8th, 2001 was my first foray into a meeting. And uh, you know, yeah, I get kind of emotional about it. But many alcoholics, the most of them that I know of, have hit a bottom of some sort. So in many cases, the quality of recovery is related to the depth of your bottom. Not always, but many times. And my bottom, I had two bottoms. I call one a bounce and one a thud. And they were about a year apart. And the bounce got me into therapy. I was about 40 years old, and there was one particular night where, after drinking out in a restaurant with some of my siblings, and the family arguments that start and whatnot, my wife and I had an argument when we got home. It spilled over into the household. It got very loud and very rageful. I blew into a rage. Um, and it wasn't violent. It didn't become violent, but I stormed out of the house and I went to my office. I owned a computer consulting firm in Midtown Manhattan, and I went to the office and I slept on the floor that night. And in the morning when I came home, I had forgotten that we had a house guest who heard the whole
Ooh.
thing. And it was a dear, dear close friend of mine from college who just happened to be a Zen Buddhist priest.
Oh, oh, wow. So, how did that make you feel?
He was wonderful. He was so gentle. He was so kind. He says, I've known you for a long time. I've known about the rage for a long time. He'd seen me explode into rages in college. Um, he goes, I called a friend who is in therapy, and here's a number of a therapist she thinks you can talk to. And so I wasn't from a family background that espoused mental health care, and I didn't know anybody who'd ever entered therapy before. This is in 2001. I didn't know anybody. I didn't realize some of my family members had gone in because it was very quiet in our family. Very, we have a don't ask, don't tell policy about all medical things in our household. Um, but I went that day. I went and saw this woman, said, I have a slot open today. Come and see me. And over time, she slowly unraveled and revealed to me the alcoholic system I was raised in. It was obvious to her from like the moment I walked in the door that I came from that kind of a system. But she spent about 6, 8, 9 months revealing it to me. What she never did was identify me as an alcoholic. And I think that was twofold. One, I don't think she recognized it because I was always on my best behavior when I came into her office. And I was always, clean and sober when I got dry of alcohol when I came in. I'd drink after I'd walked out of our sessions many times. But the second thing is that I oddly enough, I think that uh, drinking, being around alcoholics triggered her. So she didn't want to go there. Years later, I discovered that she had a lot of alcoholism in her family history. And a close friend of hers who I'd met said, oh, she won't talk about it. So she's not the person who helps people recover, but she helped me in so many profound ways with the trauma and whatnot. So a year after I started seeing her, she's the one who coaxed me into finally going to an Al-Anon meeting. Al-Anon is the program for friends and family members of alcoholics.
Okay.
Many times they are also they're working with their own addictive behavior to other people. So the way I said that woman who got out of the car and came back and apologized on her husband's behalf would have been a classic story I would have heard in an Al-Anon meeting. A person saying that, my husband's behavior embarrassed me so much, I was apologizing to others for them, you know. And so that's not an uncommon story you would hear. They take that kind of responsibility for their spouse's drinking. So when I went into Al-Anon, I thought I was there to fix my mother. I had been told that, and my father was an active drinker who, in my view, was an alcoholic. Uh, uh, I've got family members extended on both sides of my clan who I just think it's pervasive in our family. And I was there to fix them. I thought I was going in there to get people in Al-Anon to teach me how to get my mother sober. And they quickly informed me, no, we're here to help you cope with your emotions around your mother. We can't fix your mother. We can't get your mother sober, but we can help you deal with the emotions that arise with you around her because of her drinking. And it took a while for that to sink in. When I was only in Al-Anon for a few months, and the honesty and the unvarnished truth that people spoke in this program, the love, the support they gave each other, the availability to be there for each other, to help, to pick up the phone almost any time in the night or day. My mother was in her third rehab in 10 years. And, was not getting to that step one admission of alcoholism. And so I was in Al-Anon about 3 months, and a person who my father had hired to get my mother into this third rehab, they call this type of person an interventionist, called me and said, somebody would like the facility where your mother is would like you to attend a family program. And we've asked all your other siblings, and they've all said no. And they had all been to these different types of family programs before, and this time they just were refusing to go. And I said, yeah, I'll go. I was the only family member who would go. And so I flew down to Florida, where she was, and they promised me one counseling session for 1 hour, facilitated by a counselor, with my mother over this 3-day weekend. And instead, I got 5 counseling sessions with 3 different counselors, because my mother could not get to that step one. She could not come to that admission. But they said, no one's handled her the way you have. No one's talked to her as openly and honestly as you have. Everybody who comes in has been treating her like kid gloves. This is what I was told by the counselors. Everyone that we've ever talked to treated her with these kid gloves of, oh, mom, it's all going to be okay. Nobody came in and said, here's what your behavior did to me in my life.
And you did that?
And I did that. And I was given that strength and that wisdom by the members of Al-Anon, that you have to tell the alcoholic their drinking is a problem and exactly how. You can't mince words.
Mm.
So during one of these sessions, it got a little, if these things can become comical, this became a bit comical at one point. And one of my mother's core behaviors in our relationship was belittlement. She was known for what we called her zingers. She would just throw, she had that sentence that could dissolve you, reduce you to nothing, reduce you to tears in an instant.
That's pretty powerful.
Very, very powerful.
Whoa, and dangerous.
And dangerous.
Yeah.
And so at one point I said, well, Mom, I just, I want to tell you how seriously I've taken my own role in this, as I've joined Al-Anon for the friends and family. This is how she asked me, do you think I'm an alcoholic? Do you really think I'm an alcoholic? And I went, of course I do. I've joined Al-Anon based on this. And she goes, oh, Al-Anon, that's for sissies. You want to join the real program? The real men go to AA. And of course, she was trying to, just bring me down a couple of pegs, to take some wind out of my sails about my argument, and just, reduce me to nothing, just insult my manhood at, that age. But I took a breath, and something just hit me in this moment, and I can't describe it. But I said, you're right. I am an alcoholic, and I need help. And the counselor was sitting on a stool and spun around in the room. It was like a full record scratch stop, like, and spun around and said, have you ever said that out loud before? Not like that, I haven't. Not like that. And she leaned in, and the rest of the counseling session became about me. And my mother walked me around her facility after that, introducing me to her new friends and saying, he thinks he's one of us now. They can convince anybody of anything, really. Well, her friends surrounded me, and I refer to it as throwing a warm blanket around me to comfort me. And one woman in particular called me over into the corner of a room. She goes, "Can I talk to you for a moment?" And she said, "That's a tough admission, but it's the hardest part of this whole process is making that admission. I'm going to tell you something. If you get on the plane and go home to New York, pardon me, I'm choking up. If you go back to New York and go to AA, you'll never have to come to a place like this because AA is free and this is expensive." And she said, "You will never," and this was a legal lockdown. My mother was not allowed to leave the premises. She was all but incarcerated being in
Oh,
this facility. And she said, "You'll never have to come to a place like this." So about 2 or 3 days after that, on May 8th, 2001, I was back in New York. I was in my psychiatrist's office. He had gently tried to point out he thought I was an alcoholic. A month earlier, I had bit his head off in the rudest way possible. My denial mechanism kicked in. Me. I literally said to him in that session, I said, "What school did you walk by?" And I looked up on this guy's wall, and the diplomas that he had there were from Yale, Harvard, and Columbia faculty. So he had some street cred. And so I'm coming back just defeated a month later after this session with my mother. And I walked into his office and I said, I apologize for my behavior last month. I'm so sorry I addressed you that way. I am an alcoholic. I need help. And he said, "There are meetings down the street." And I walked down to that. It was my first AA meeting ever. Um,
that would
and
have been scary.
I took one little baby step. It was like in front of the other. I was in a suit and tie, suited up for work. And I was just, it was the slowest, it was like a death march of sorts. And it did feel that way. It felt like I was ending one life without knowing I was about to begin another. And when I got when I got to where the meeting place was, there were people out on the sidewalk smoking cigarettes. A clear indicator that there's an AA meeting going on nearby. And I walked over to these men and I said, "Hey, do you guys know anything about?" And they said, "What?" I said, "AA." I said, "Oh, AA, you're looking for AA? It's down in the basement. Go on downstairs. It's okay." And when I got down there, somebody asked me, they said, "Well, we got about 15 minutes left in this meeting, sir. Would you like to say anything?" And I started sobbing. The truth of everything, the relief of the admission just overwhelmed me. And I just started sobbing and and I started blurting out my story. And, I need help. I really need help. And again, in one of those little, magic little comic moments that can happen, at one point, the chairperson I'm flooding out through sobs, heaving sobs for about 15 minutes. And he said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I have to pause you, but the meeting's over now." And once again, that warm blanket, the meeting ended, and people jumped up and literally surrounded me and hugged me, and they handed me phone numbers. And I remember being encased in this group of people, and one big hand, a male meaty hand, came through the group and grabbed my hand, and he said some magic words to me. He said, "You're going to be all right." Oh my God, I needed that. I was at, many alcoholics will talk about that point of admission as being the moment they saw their own incomprehensible demoralization. And I didn't realize how deeply ingrained I was in incomprehensible demoralization. And he gave me those words and they lifted me out of the morass. It was so simple. It was so kind, but so necessary. And he knew to say it.
He probably said it many times to many people.
He had
but he'd
probably
had
said
it,
it many times.
but he probably had it said to him first and
Exactly.
knew what it meant. So therefore he, it's really interesting that people and this lady that I was having a conversation with was also saying that your first admission is saying that you're an alcoholic, and then going there, and there's no hierarchy or anything like that. It comes from people who are CEOs of companies to management to every walk of life that go into those places because they need help.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very brave step to be able to step into there in the first place. But I'm imagining it would be one of the best steps that you ever took in your life.
Absolutely. It's the scariest thing and the most beautiful thing
Mm.
that many alcoholics point to as turning points in their lives.
So let's move on from here because we've talked about this considerably a lot, and anyone that's listening to it, hopefully, if they're in that situation, they step into a 12-step program and get the
Mhm.
help they need so that they can step out into the life that they're meant to have. And that's
Beautifully said. Beautifully
and
said.
that's what you did. You stepped in, worked through the process, and stepped out into the other side of life. And now you help other people with mental health issues or mental
Mhm.
fitness, as you call it. And you also talked about very briefly about your son.
Mhm.
Can we share a little bit about your son and what you've actually learnt from him? Because we've spoken about him before and I've not met him, but I think he's the most magical child on the earth. So please share.
Sure, sure. Adam, as I said, he's 16. He's a beautiful human that just happens to have Down syndrome. And, anybody who's got a person with Down syndrome in their lives, can vouch for much of what I'll say about Adam. Um, he, it's how do I describe him? One, he's the most. So this is a beautiful thing. Yeah, I was talking to somebody once about Down syndrome, and they said, "Well, they're the happiest children." And I said, "Well, I don't know about that because they have a full range of emotion like anybody else, and their emotions, in my view, make more sense than other people's emotions. They're very, for lack of a better term, rational about their emotions. What they get upset about should be upsetting, to
Yeah.
people. What they laugh about are generally funny things. They're not living in a vacuum at all. But one thing I will say that many, many family members of Down syndrome yeah, will vouch for is that they're the most present human beings. Adam is one of the most present human beings in life I've ever met. So even as a small child, as when 2 to 3 years old, he went through the terrible twos, like anybody else. And it's where his, the brain development and learning how to deal with things and this new emotional life emerging. Yeah, he had temper tantrums and the like. But whatever he got upset about, the moment you solved it, he'd be heaving sobs. No, no, I need this. And you would like solve the problem, give him, he goes, okay, I'm happy now. He would
Brilliant.
just jump up. It would just turn on and on. Okay, thank you. Phew, God, I'm happy now. And I have beautiful videos of him, for instance, he needs a lot of medical monitoring. He's in perfect health, but for instance, he gets 1 or 2 blood draws a year for endocrinology. It's a very common aspect of having Down syndrome. And he dreaded needle sticks. He doesn't like getting shots. Many adults don't. Yeah, there you
I don't,
go.
no,
There
don't
you
like it.
go.
Mm.
You should see how he handles fear in these moments. It's inspiring. He talks himself through it. He won't let me help him. He just talks about, well, they're going to give you a little thing. They're going to say this is going to be a little pinch. He'll play it all out beforehand. I have a picture of him being about 6 or 7 years old, and he's looking straight at what they're doing, and at the right time he looks away, and he's not crying. Now he went through moments where it was sheer panic. He was like clinging to my neck. He wouldn't, take a shot or do anything, but he found his own way to deal with it. And then after they give him the shot, he goes, "Oh, thank you all. You all did a wonderful job." And it just melts your heart. And that's who he is to this day.
Yeah.
He just came from a prom. He did his first prom, and to see him dancing up a storm, and he's Mr. Fun at the storm, he's just entering into it fully in the moment. And he always does. So, and he's my Buddha. By being in the moment around me, he's always bringing me back to the present moment. So, had he seen me address that driver in the street that day, he would have he said, "Dad, you're being goofus." That's our word for you're misbehaving, you're not doing the right thing. He would have said, "Don't do that anymore. You're being goofus." And so I'm glad he didn't see me, get righteous with that particular person.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because on Instagram, there's this little boy and he has Down syndrome, and he is the most gorgeous, lovable person you could ever see, always smiling. His parents are sharing his story, I suppose, but it's a magical story, and he's being treated like any other child, no different, but he's so happy and beautiful, beautiful. It's really inspiring. Yeah, and it's sort of like I look at him, and he's always got a smile on his face.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And always present. They
Mm-hmm.
take photos of him. He's on Instagram. He's got thousands of followers and all the rest of it. But it's just amazing how, as a parent of a Down syndrome child, you don't hide them away. You don't
Right.
treat them like they're stupid or anything, because they're not. They have
Oh, he's
feelings.
very smart. Let me tell you a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Mm,
I always laugh, and this is, again, people with someone with Down syndrome will relate to this. Um, but he has problems dressing himself. So I always, he has problems getting his shoes on the correct feet oftentimes. However, he also knows how to throw all the trip switches in our apartment. He knows he knows which ones do what, and he will use them to prank me. And I will be in the shower, and he'll flip off the lights in my bedroom, in my bathroom, using the breaker box and I'm like, all right. And I always laugh, say, you can't get your shoes on the right feet, but you know how to use that breaker box. He can operate his iPad like a boss. So during the pandemic here, when he was doing remote learning with the school, I'd be in the other room while he was on his classes on an iPad. And you'd hear the teacher going, "Adam, Adam, Adam, stop sharing your screen. You know that when you share your screen, I can't share mine." And he'd be like, you know, and look, I was the same type of miscreant when I was in grade school. So it was like, okay, I guess he genetically is my child, because he's pranking the teacher. But those are the types of things he gets into. And he can say he can cook for himself. He can do a lot of things. He solves problems very well. He's very, very smart in many different ways.
yes, but you've allowed him and educated him also to be able to do those things and be aware and give
Hmm.
him the confidence. Whereas some people who have a child such as Down syndrome and many years ago, I remember working in the area, working in the area of disability, or supporting some friends of mine who used to work in disability, and working with them to help them understand hygiene and dress and that sort of thing, because their parents did everything for them. But when your parent is not around, who has to do those things for you? You should be able to do them yourself. So you need to be independent. You need to be able to cook and understand. And the majority of humans living with, what do you say? I don't want to say disability. Living with an issue.
Yeah, or different abilities is one
Different
word.
abilities. Yeah, living with different abilities are capable of doing things if they're shown how.
Yeah. And there is and in some cases you have to show them how in a particular way because their minds order things.
Yeah.
So with Adam, it was a lot about what educators call scaffolding. So just building one skill on top of another very slowly. And it took a lot of time. So he can do the laundry completely by himself. And we live in an apartment building that has a laundry room. So since he's been a little child, the scaffolding started with loading the washing machine. And he would help his mother and I load the washing machine, just take the clothes out of the basket. And he started to love that chore, but it took a while to teach that chore. And then as he got older, we did, putting the detergent in the machine. We did, as only a few years ago, we taught him how to pay for the machine, and it's a card and it's complicated. But now he can do it like a boss. He can do the whole thing by himself like a boss. And since the moment literally, no exaggeration, the day he was born, swaddled in that little cloth, my commitment to him was to give him the skills to live as independent a life as possible.
Absolutely.
And, things like separation issues and things like that, as tough as they were for me, I knew that they were necessary for him.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really important that we all, even those that don't live with those differences in life, some of them wouldn't know how to cook or boil an egg or
Right.
cook
Exactly.
a piece of toast or whatever. So I think
Not
everyone.
that they couldn't, as you said, they can be taught. It just takes
Yes.
time and patience in many
Yes.
cases.
And you have to have that patience. Now let's move on to, Ray, what you do now, coming from a place of your first drink at 12, being an alcoholic and realizing it at 17, becoming, going into sobriety at 41, and realizing there's another life out there for you. What is it that you do now?
Well, part of that journey, while I was drinking is I was also an entrepreneur, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial household, which factors into what I do now. So as I mentioned earlier, I was a computer consultant in Manhattan, and I owned a company there. And when I first came into recovery, I still owned that company. And shut it down shortly thereafter, mainly not due to my drinking or sobriety, but 9/11. I had 5 clients in the World Trade Center. But what was relevant to my sobriety was I wasn't compos mentis to float the company through that kind of tragedy, through that kind of trouble.
It was tragedy. It was
Yeah,
tragedy.
it
Yeah.
was tragedy. It was tragic. I knew 6 people who died that day. So, and again, that sometimes catches me off guard, that still chokes me up.
I remember that day as though it was yesterday. I remember that
Yes,
day.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
Many people do.
Where were you? We could get it. We could make a whole show about that.
I know exactly where I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
When that
Yeah.
happened. Yeah.
Right.
So the effects to you of 9/11 and shutting down your business and moving into what you do now
Mm-hmm.
is what?
So I shut that business down, as we said, and then part of my recovery, the 11th step of 12-step program say that that we sought through prayer and meditation. Now many people who are not religious, not spiritual, and whatnot, um, uh, might react to the word prayer. It's there's nothing religious about AA. There's nothing that's proselytizing in any way. The prayer and meditation simply refers to you know having some awareness in your life of something larger than oneself that you can communicate with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a god or a supreme being of some kind. So I really like to say that because no one within a 12-step program will insist that you adopt any belief system. But the emphasis for me was on the word meditation, and that was simply quieting my mind. Um, uh, as a traumatized, as a survivor of childhood trauma, um, my mind was on a hamster wheel. And that hamster was the biggest threat to my sobriety. The racing thoughts. I would get so obsessive in my thoughts that I referred to it as a steel ball on a magnetic track, going round and round and round in my head. And I literally would get dizzy working things out. And I had this image of reaching in, grabbing the ball, putting it in the center of my head, feeling the relief, which is the mind stilling down. But then all of a sudden, that magnet would go blink, and it would go onto that steel track and whirr, whirr, and it would just keep racing and racing. So I realized at some point, and through therapy and psychiatry, that I had to address this if I was going to preserve my sobriety, if I was going to be able to stay away from drinking. And so I started, so shortly after my second year or so in sobriety, I'd shut my company down and I'd gone and taken a middle management job at a corporation outside of New York City and New Jersey. And it was the craziest environment I could have possibly entered into. It was a foreign company. It was the US headquarters of a foreign company. Culturally, this group, was chaotic as all get out. They had certain cultural norms and how they managed the company that were jarring, shocking, and the stress for this middle management job that was way far and above and beyond what it should have been. And after a while, so I picked this one coping mechanism. And to me, I started it in protest to begin with. And I had a little Nokia. Do you remember the little Nokia, cell
Of
phones?
phones, yeah.
Yeah. And I had that little Nokia pocket phone, and it was before smartphones. And so at one point, I set an alarm on it to go off at the top of every hour and just go ding, 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 ding at the top of every hour to remind me. And I would just stop what I was doing. And no, there wasn't meditation in here. It was just like out of protest for 1 minute, an hour, I'm not doing anything, because people were just constantly barraging you with requests. So I was a computer consultant for them, serving their HR department, and the reports that they wanted written and the fixes they wanted to the system and the blah and coming to me and asking, you have to fix the server in the server room. Well, that's not my job. No, you have to fix it. Okay. That's the kind of stuff that just got slammed at me all day, every day. So I would just stop and just be for about 60 seconds. And then I started focusing on my breath. After a while, I would just say, okay, just breathe for, what could it hurt? And it would just calm me down. And then almost out of protest, again, I would say, all right, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm just going to move in slow motion for a little while. They all want it done yesterday. I'm gonna just pick this one sheet of paper out of the inbox and I'm gonna put it on the desk in front of me and I'm gonna read every word of it. And then I'm gonna put my hands on the keyboard and and I was doing like this and just click, 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 click. I go, I'll show them. Well, I mentioned this to my Zen Buddhist priest friend. And I said, well, here's, God, this place is crazy. So this is what I'm doing. I'm showing them. And he goes, oh, you're meditating. I said, no, 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 I'm not really meditating. I imagine you sat in robes and you lit incense and you crossed your legs and, that was meditating. No, 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 I'm just stopping. This is a protest, a halt. And he goes, yeah, no, you're meditating. If you're stopping and focusing on your breath, you're meditating. And I go, oh, all right, whatever. Well, what I realized in this slow down thing is that I was actually suddenly getting far more efficient in the work. Um, at the end of the day, miraculously, the inbox would be empty. My desk got spick and span clean. Like all people are like, how do you keep your desk like that clean? I said, I don't know. I'm moving in slow motion. And the emails were all replied to, the calls were all returned. I was able to suddenly start going home at 5 o'clock, leave. I would walk out without a briefcase, without anything in my hands. People were shocked at that. And at the end of that year, I made 110%, I think, of my bonus. And they had given me a target to set me up to fail originally. They were going to show me. They said they gave me these targets and they told me, said, we don't expect you to hit 70% of these targets, but if you don't hit 80, you're out of here. And it's like, okay. And they had to convene a board meeting or a meeting of senior executives to give me this 110% of my bonus. Nobody had ever exceeded their bonus goals by that much before. And it was towards the end of that year that I realized what a profound effect that pausing had and that it had quieted my mind in such a way that it allowed me to focus on things in this present moment. And that's when I started really pursuing meditation in earnest. And I went to take some classes, a few classes in New York City from a teacher who then, within a few months, has said, I'm going to introduce you to my teacher. So he was in a beautiful way handing me up, to his teacher, who wasn't taking new students, but my teacher said, I think you should take this guy. And I've been studying with that gentleman now for about 16, 17 years. And both of these men came to me a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, and said, it's time for you to start teaching. And so start considering what methods you want to teach and how you'd like to teach. So one thing I did is I went and I got certified in something called mindfulness-based stress reduction. It was developed in the 70s by John Kabat-Zinn. It's sort of a secularized version of Eastern wisdom. He sort of extracted all the non-religious points of it, the idea of mindfulness, the idea of meditation. He also adopted yoga, certain Hindu principles and whatnot, all about maintaining calmness and present moment awareness. And his definition of mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment.
Paying attention on purpose in the present moment without attention.
Without judgment.
Without judgment.
With full attention without judgment.
Mm. Mm.
So, I can give some examples of that. I'm going to take this bottle of water and I'm going to just take the cap off of it. And I'm going to hold just the cap in my hand. And then I'm just going to explore what that cap is. What's the weight of it? How does it feel in my hand? The ridges that are used to grip with. I can look at it visually and recognize that I can see through this transparently. And that's just allowing yourself to be with all the pure sensations that are coming through those five senses on something without saying anything else about this. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. There's not a story around this. When I'm holding it in my hand like this, I'm not identifying it as a bottle cap. It is just this, whatever this is. And that has a way of stilling the mind completely, which also has a hormonal effect. It also changes the hormonal activity in your mind and in your brain and in your body. And it almost instantly reduces stress. It gets that hamster off the wheel.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I always say that we need to be in the present moment because that's all we have.
That's
The
all we have.
the past is the past. The future is in the future. All we have is right here, right now. The conversation we have is what we have this moment. And it's all about stilling the mind because your head, heart, and hand, thoughts, feeling, and actions are the thing that can take us to the next level or bring us undone, depending on what those thoughts are. And as as we get older and wiser sometimes, I think, you tend to realize how important life is because it goes so fast and it's going faster. It seems to be going faster now. So stilling the mind, can you use only your breath for stilling the mind instead of having, say, a pen and you're analyzing the pen, feeling it, touching it, there's clickers on it, there's a top on it, there's a thing here. Is it that you can just breathe and just allow the mind to still?
Yes. Let me segue, if you don't mind, into the idea of mental fitness and how that fits into what your question is.
Yep.
So I am not a mental health professional. I'm not diagnosing anybody. I'm not treating anybody. I'm not curing anybody of anything. No one needs a diagnosis to benefit from the types of things I teach. So mental fitness borrows from the paradigm of physical fitness, where you go to the gym and you pick up light weights and you do a few reps to get started, and you build from there to achieve your goals, whether it's strength training or energy or weight loss, whatever you're doing. So in the same thing, I'm helping people train their minds to quiet down. Anyone's mind can do this, is capable of doing this. You'll have lots of people, oh, no, my mind or my job is too crazy. I could never stop thinking about it. It would be dangerous if I stopped thinking. We're not talking about the cognitive energy that you use to solve problems in your daily life. We're talking about rumination when you're talking about the past. And that we only have this present moment. That doesn't mean if they ask you at the doctor's office, when were you here last, that you just ignore the question. When we're not referring to that type of factual information about the past. Where did you go to school? When did you do baba? No, we're talking about the rumination on life events that comes up. So as part of that mental training, we talk about focus. And that's the point that I'm bringing you up to your question, whereby you can pick any one of a number of focal points, but the mind can only focus on one thing at a time. It can only process one sense at a time. It sometimes looks like we have the impression that we're seeing and hearing at the same time. We're not. It's happening so fast. It's changing back and forth so fast that we have the impression that it's simultaneous. But you can actually focus and process only one sense at a time. So the breath is one way of using a physical sensation to focus on. And basically, it's a touch sensation. You're feeling the air passing your nostrils. That's one common way to focus on the breath. Or you're sensing into the belly moving up and down with the breath. Other things that you can focus on is this very simple point in front of you. You can focus on, some people are not comfortable closing their eyes during meditation. So I instruct them to focus on a point. So you'll see people focus on a candle flame. That's a very common
Yeah.
thing to do. You can also focus on sound. So just process the sounds, just let the sounds come into your ear non-judgmentally. You don't care what they are. It can be horns honking, it can be people talking, it can be just a little low room hum going on. And sorry, there's something flying around here. It can be just the low room hum. So you can process sound as well. There's also a way to do tactile focusing. Just take your fingertips and touch them together, and maybe even like stroke your palms. Notice how sensitive the hands are while you're doing this. It's really quite profound, and it has a way of stilling and focusing the mind. So many different things can be used to help focus that mind. But the idea of focus is that you can only do one at a time. So you stick with one, you pick one, you stick with it, and that will bring the mind still.
It's interesting because we say we can tackle several different, particularly women, we can multitask and we can be doing several things at a time. But when you want to quiet your mind and think about your breath, we concentrate on one thing at a time. And it could be, sitting still, closing your eyes. If you don't like closing your eyes, then it's taking that breath and feeling that breath come in through the nose and the belly expanding as you breathe in, and then breathing out as the belly flattens. And things like that. Very simple things that we don't give ourselves the opportunity to actually do very often.
Now, I want to point out there's a point to this focusing. Many people say, well, I can't quiet my mind. And you say, well, that's very common, that you won't be able to. The mind will wander while you're focusing. Everyone's mind does. The Dalai Lama's mind wanders. And no one has this pure silence, there are people, there are very, very few people. But the point of having a focal point is that when it does wander and you become aware that it has wandered, that you bring it back. You have some place to come back to. And you do this non-judgmentally. Oh, there's that thought again. Oh, I'm thinking it. No, you go, the mind has drifted. Now bring it back. If this happens 100 times during a particular short meditation, and I'm constantly having to come back to the breath, or if that happens 100 times, you've had 100 moments of mindfulness. You've been mindful 100 times. So that's you're saying, you're pointing to yourself,
yeah. Because the mind wanders. I do my meditation, and I'll be listening to a meditation, and there'll be music playing, and there'll be a voice saying things, and I'll wander off, and then I'll come back, and wander off and come back again. But it's that coming back and focusing and really listening to what's either being said or the music that's being played at that time to bring you back into that present moment of that you say focus, but it is a meditation. It is a place of being present.
Mm-hmm.
It's being
Mm-hmm.
present in that moment
Mm-hmm.
and
That's
remaining
it.
there.
And you can be present with thought. They're
Yes.
not mutually exclusive. If you're aware that you're thinking, you
Yeah.
know, so over time, what happens is that ruminating thoughts, those are the thoughts that you latch onto and you chew them to death and you grind them down. And they're constant. You're ruminating over childhood issues or the guy who slighted you, at the Starbucks this morning, or that, whatever. That's rumination. That's getting onto a thought and building a story on it, expanding. But then over time, what happens is that the memory of that person at the Starbucks, for instance, floats up and then it floats by and you let it go. It doesn't become an emotional event for you. And your whole system, your limbic system actually literally calms down. And then you're able to start focusing the mind on things that are useful to you. Like I said, I was taking one thing out of the inbox and reading the whole order through, and therefore I wasn't jumping to start the order before, I knew what it really was about, which is so often for me.
It would have really annoyed the people around you though for a period of
Oh,
time.
it drove them nuts. It's like, oh, there it goes again. Come on, we need this now. And it's like, I'll be right with you, But then I wound up nailing it. I wound up, hitting it out of the park. But it was because my mind could suddenly do things that were useful, not things that were literally draining me of energy.
So when the board met and they had to acknowledge your brilliance of what you'd done for the company, and that's what it is basically. It is acknowledging because they employed you to actually fail because they didn't think you could do the job.
Mm-hmm.
You proved them wrong in a way that was calm, comfortable, conscious,
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
focus,
Mm-hmm.
focused,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
you let go of all the noise around you and you focused on what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what was the lesson or lessons? Did they share them with you? What were the lessons that they learned from you?
No, they did not. But I will tell you that they started treating me in an uncharacteristic way in their culture. So when I refer to their culture, they were an Asian company,
Right.
and they had a hierarchy. And in Asian environments, a subordinate is not allowed to question the directions of a boss or a manager in any way. You can't even ask a clarifying question, you know.
Serious?
Oh, absolutely. You can't say, do you want, so they would come in and ask for these very complicated data reports from their human resources and salary systems. And I would say, do you want the salary column to look like this or to look like that? And you'll just do it. You just do it. And I don't mean to be racist. I hope it's, I'm just remembering the voices that I'm talking to. And they would cut, the question like, how dare you question us? Um, and so they did not give lavish respect on subordinates very often. And they would often ask you to do something that was completely outside your job description. But what you didn't realize is they also asked 5 other people to do the same ridiculous thing. And they were just waiting to see who was going to fulfill it first. So when they came to me and said, you have to fix the server downstairs in the basement, if I had the time, I was an expert in hardware and also, in operating systems. I went, all right, let me go take a look at it, and would wind up doing things like that. Well, what happened after that moment, I left the firm actually before I got paid the bonus. I was offered a new job. But before I left, many of them were transferred outside of the headquarters. And three of these people, very, very senior members, the president of the North American division, whatnot, on the days that they left, sought me out at my desk and gave me a deep bow. And in each case said some version of, I will miss you. And and when they would walk away, the people around going, what just happened? He's never walked into this section of the building before. What just happened? And I was like, something, it was really quite moving. So something in my demeanor, something in my behavior changed that attracted them, I think. The calmness with which I started bringing things to them, the Zen mode, the Zenness of what I was doing, I think affected them. But I was quite moved by it. And when the feedback I got, my boss called me to tell me, by the way, we didn't have to pay your bonus at all before you left. But when this group got together, they unanimously voted to pay you this bonus and to pay anybody who exceeded their bonuses up to the point that they exceeded it. One of the reasons I highlight this story is the powerful effect that mindfulness and mental fitness can have on your professional performance. And that this story of them coming to bow, to me, these were contentious relationships. These were, these were not fun relationships at all. And it changes your personal relationships with others, including your romantic relationships with your spouse, and the like. And all of those things contribute to your overall well-being. You just feel better.
It's all about, is it, and I don't think it's the right way of saying it, taking control of who you are, taking control of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and being aware of who you are and who you want to be, and perceive yourself to be, not what anyone else sees you as, but who you see yourself as.
Well, let me address that, because yes, that's all true, but you don't have to consciously come to those answers. You don't have to consciously answer those questions. If you focus on being in the present moment, all those questions answer themselves. All of those things come through. Who you truly are will start to come through. I'm not a rageful alcoholic, at my core. I'm not a disruptive, unkind person at my core. But when I just allow myself to be in this present moment, those qualities come forth.
Isn't it amazing how many people allow that to happen? Not very many,
Right.
Because they don't know how.
They don't know how.
That's and they need to be shown, an awareness needs to be created so that they do know, they understand that this can be for them as it is for you, Ray, as it is for the Buddhist monk that you know, and for others who practice being in the moment, doing the meditation, and allowing that moment it can heal.
Very much so.
It can heal whatever's going on. It can then give you the space to be able to allow those things that you've asked for, and the universe has them holding them there for you, to come to you.
Right. You're allowing them to come. You're opening the gate to allow them in.
Yeah. It just makes sense. It just makes so much sense. And I think that Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. Now we're coming to the end. So, Ray, what tip or tips, 2 tips, would you give to the listeners about being in the present moment or creating the awareness so that they can be, so that it changes the way they perceive life in the fast lane, when they can take it into this moment of, let's say, Zen,
Mm-hmm.
and then do the work, but in a more calming way?
Yeah. Well, the very first thing I would say is recognize that it's possible. Many people have, as we said earlier, resist. My mind can't do this. I'm not good at this. There's all of these resisting thoughts. Well, as soon as finished listening, is if you pause and take 3 conscious breaths, where all you do is pay attention to the breath, you will have achieved a level of mindfulness right there. And all you have to do is expand on that when you want to. There's a beautiful little tip by Thich Nhat Hanh, a famous monk. No one has to be a monk to do these things. You just have to be. And so he says, every time you hear a phone ring, take 3 conscious breaths.
Oh,
And you will see how and you can do that anywhere. You can do that in the midst of a contentious meeting. Nobody has to know you're taking these breaths. You can do it standing in line at the Starbucks. You can do it waiting at the stoplight in the car. And that's just fill your lungs up and then release the oxygen and then fill them up again, release it, and then one more time. And start there. It's very, very simple. It's amazing how it resets a lot of the chemicals inside your system that govern your anxiety levels and your stress levels.
it's amazing, isn't it? Well, thank you, Ray, for such a fabulous conversation. And that's today's show, a conversation with Faye, where we've journeyed through the raw and the real experiences that can shape our lives, or that do shape our lives, from the power of alcoholism into that mental fitness of well-being, taking what you've heard Ray share on the show today and change one thing in your life which will make a difference to who you are and where you want to go. So thank you for listening. I'm Faye Waterman, and we will be back with A Conversation with Faye next week. Bye for now.